The Roaring Twenties, what a time it was. After surviving the First World War, now was a period of restoration, revitalization, and much revelry. And no one realized this better in that decade than the flapper, the most iconic symbol of the 1920s. Seen as renegades of that time, much of the progress in female empowerment today is owed to our daring and non-conforming grandmas and great-grandmas. Hello and welcome to History of Life, where we relive history's greatest moments and the eras in between. Today we're looking back at the so-called misfits of the 1920s, the flappers, who not only broke the rules, they also broke the ground for womankind. Until the early 1900s, women were dictated by the patriarchy on how they should carry themselves, their manner of dressing, their function in the household, and their interactions with society. However, just 2 decades into the 20th century, a revolutionary shift for American women was taking place. This shift came from the most unexpected sector of society, young single women who sought to become their own person. They were the flappers. They desired to think for themselves, work for themselves, and live life according to their own terms. Something totally unheard of in that era. Before the flappers came to be, women wore long ankle-length dresses over tight-fitting corsets that accentuated the female form. This was just one carryover from the Victorian era, which asserted that women needed to be modest and obedient to social norms. In 1919, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution suddenly gave Caucasian women the right to vote, causing a ripple effect in American society. This dramatic change in the nation's socio-political landscape ultimately gave rise to the flapper. More than just a fashion statement, the flapper symbolized a radical movement. They challenged the status quo, opening the much-needed conversation that women could bring so much more to the table. So how exactly did these iconoclastic women come to be known by such an equally irreverent name? Look no further than our distant cousins. The term flapper was reputedly a British slang word for a girl still coming of age, who still wore pigtails flapping behind her, kind of like a young bird still learning how to control its flapping wings. The term crossed over to the United States, where its meaning evolved to a more grown-up woman who may have, figuratively speaking, now learned to flap its wings. But this time, she's also flying high on her own. When people hear of flappers, the first thing that comes to mind is fashion. And rightly so, as flappers revolutionized how women dressed, unleashing a sense of freedom in how they wanted to present themselves. Defying more conventional feminine looks, flappers donned bobbed haircuts just a little above their ears. They ditched the tight-fitting petticoats of the Victorian era and opted to wear loose, strappy dresses that hung just a little off their knee. They went out and about wearing no gloves, no stockings, and just a bell-shaped hat called the cloche hat to cover their heads. Imagine the scandalous glares your grandma or great-grandma might have gotten back in her day, going to town dressed like that when most women around her were completely covered from head to toe. But flappers didn't care what others thought of their mode of dress. They were good as long as it afforded them comfort and sheer freedom of movement. And speaking of freedom of movement, those flappers surely did love to move around, especially when it came to the dance floor. They loved gyrating to the quick-step dances like the Charleston, the turkey trot, or the shimmy. which were too provocative for much of a society back then. Other than clothing, flappers were also big on accessorizing, particularly when wearing jewelry and makeup, lots and lots of makeup. Aside from dancing, flappers enjoyed a host of activities that only the men could not too long ago. These included playing sports, partying in speakeasies even during Prohibition, going to jazz shows, driving their own cars, and of course, shopping. After the war ended and the economy recovered, a consumerism culture followed. Flappers were one of the easiest markets to target, especially since many entered the workforce by then. Along with spending power, flappers also cultivated overtly independent attitudes that made them more open about their sexuality. The highly venerated trait of the modest woman from the Victorian era was out the window, as flappers sought pleasure just like the men did, even joining the hush-hush petting parties of those times. Enjoying all this insight about flappers so far? What's the one tidbit we've shared that blew you away? Well, stick around, as we're almost getting to the most fabulous revelations about the flapper culture. Back in the day, while most of society looked down on flappers as provocateurs who only cared about their looks and lifestyle, they overlooked the reality that flappers actually gave birth to a movement. Thanks to their insistence on living life their way, flappers helped advance women's rights and freedoms beyond being kept at home for childbirth and spousal partnership. At last, women could hold a candle to men. What also helped the flapper movement to spread more was the flapper's proliferation into pop culture. The titular silent film The Flapper, released in 1920, paved the way for several breakout actresses who embodied the flapper persona, such as Frances Morgan, Clara Bow, and Louise Brooks. Magazines often featured flappers on their front covers. And when it came to books, no one wrote about the flapper more profusely than F. Scott Fitzgerald, who married Zelda Sayre, a prolific flapper of that era. Despite becoming mainstream, flappers still faced much opposition throughout the 1920s. Conservative Americans considered them a nuisance, threatening the sanctity of traditional family values. To dissuade younger girls from becoming flappers, some states even passed laws prohibiting women from wearing any clothing above the knees. Perhaps much to the relief of these conservative households, the turn of the decade signified the beginning of the end for flappers. The Great Depression caused nationwide economic hardship, making it more difficult for flappers to sustain their not-so-cheap lifestyle. Plus, the 1930s became a time of frugality and prudence, which was in stark contrast to the seemingly endless good times of the decade before. While the flapper way of living was short-lived, the after-effects of the flapper movement carried on. Without a doubt, beyond the fashion and lifestyle, these brash women of the Roaring '20s influenced American culture and society throughout the 20th century and even until today. Unintentional as it may seem, the flapper movement was instrumental in propelling the cause of feminism for a new generation of daughters, wives, mothers, and single women. If ever your grandma or great-grandma was a flapper, maybe you could let her know that not only did she champion women's rights, she was probably also a lot cooler and more badass than she thought. Thank you for watching History of Life. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the flapper culture. Like this video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to know when the next one comes out. See you in the next video.